You're right, they're wrong, and that's the end of the matter. Right? Unless they disagree with you and they're convinced that they're in the right, and then you've got a problem. You might have an argument. A heated expression of divergent views. Now, maybe there's a resolution of sorts, but neither of you are really satisfied with the outcome. And there's that awkward aftermath that might actually lead to another clash of wills. So, in the interests of healthy relationships, what do you do? Well, it turns out that managing this aftermath period is key to success. Psychologist Rachel Hannam from North Brisbane Psychologists has more. Rachel, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
What is meant by the aftermath of an argument? Is that just when you've both slammed the doors and you're not talking to each other?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, couples fight about all sorts of things, and often trivial things, as we know. But in couples therapy, we're not interested so much in what couples fight about, but how they fight, and even more importantly, how they repair afterwards. That's what we're talking about with the aftermath of a fight.
Okay.
It's how they process the conflict afterwards that matters.
So what are some do's and don'ts then, perhaps, or some general advice for processing your feelings and bringing about a healthy resolution?
Great question. Well, often, you know, people are feeling very lonely, very disrespected, very neglected, very angry, maybe very resentful. And what we want to do is not react to those feelings and act out those feelings, because that will just create more conflict. Or what the other thing we do is we shut down and we just think, never again, you know, will I talk about it? I'll just never talk about it again. Or I'll never let my partner see my vulnerable side. But both of those approaches don't really work. So we have a process that we use with couples which helps them process the conflict without falling back into it. I like the metaphor of sitting right back in the stadium and looking at what happened from that perspective rather than being down there in the mud. The first step that we use with couples is we ask them to share how they felt during and after the fight without saying why they felt this way. And that sounds strange, but it's really important to just start with, this is how I felt, this is how it feels for me, and avoid commenting on the why. This is because then what happens is we get into the because you. I felt really hurt, I felt really disrespected because you. And then we start getting back into the four horsemen, which we've talked about, the blame, the criticism, the defensiveness. So just the vulnerable feelings. You know, I felt hurt, I felt disappointed, I felt ignored, I felt rejected. And just talking about our own feelings, not the other person. So that's step one.
Step one. Step two?
I can go on. There's a few more steps if you like.
Yes, please.
Yes. So step two is, once we've separated out the feelings from our perceptions, then we can talk about our perceptions. Because normally after we've shared our feelings without any judgment or attribution, we have a bit of empathy going on, just a little bit. Then I can say, this is my reality. It seemed to me like this. This was my perception. And in the Gottman method, we talk about valid subjective realities, which is that both sides have their own version, their own world that they're living in, and it's valid for them, even though they disagree and have different perceptions. So I get each person to summarise and validate at least a little bit of their partner's reality. And then we can go into that reality. We can look at the triggers, because everybody has the past in their memory, past experiences or memories from this relationship or early life relationships, perhaps from childhood. And these memories and these stories are why certain things are so triggering for us. So then at this point we can share in step three what triggered me, at what point. Like normally we're fine, and then our partner says something or does something, and then we're triggered. And so that's the start of the fight.
Yes.
So we want to go back to that trigger point and understand, why did that trigger my partner? I didn't think it was going to, but it did. You know, and once each person understands their partner's trigger and why it's a trigger for them, again, there's a little bit more empathy and understanding, which is going to be helpful to processing the conflict without getting stuck back in it again. So that's step three. And step four, then we're ready for step four, and we can't really do it until, you know, we've had this understanding and empathy. Step four is responsibility taking. So acknowledging your role, your part in contributing to the argument or to the regrettable incident. Each person, even if it's only 5%, I say, has some part, even if it's through non-reaction, some part that they've played in creating the situation or the problem. And when each person takes some responsibility, it's like people put their swords away, you know, it's like, oh, well, this is my part, this is my bit. And that really helps. And that gets us to the fifth and final step, where we can make some constructive plans for the future and make it better for next time.
That sounds very easy. I mean, it also sounds...
It sounds
very,
easy,
very sensible.
But it's not.
No, when you think about it. And in terms of moving through those 5 steps to the point where you're thinking about, okay, how can we do better next time? What could be helpful there, Rachel? Like writing a couple of things down, having some guidelines on the fridge, you know, any sort of practical advice there?
Yeah, well, I think once you've understood your partner's reality, like I said in step 2, and their triggers, which is step 3, then, you know, it's all out in the open. Then it's much easier to say, you know, I'm getting triggered here. Rather than getting defensive and attacking or counter-attacking, you can say, I'm feeling really triggered right now. You know, remember, this is a thing for me. We want to avoid those 4 horsemen of criticism, defensiveness, contempt and stonewalling. And we want to be able to kind of do what we did in the aftermath, you know, processing the fight. Say how we feel. Say why we're triggered. Say what we need. You know, own some responsibility if it's appropriate to say, look, you know, this is true what you're saying to a point. I have been a bit distant lately, or whatever it might be that, you know, it helps us be less defensive. But definitely anything you learn, anything you plan in terms of agreements for next time, it's a great idea to write them down, stick them on the fridge, lipstick on the bathroom mirror, whatever helps you to remember. What you've agreed.
To practice that. And it's, you know, the ongoing process of self-awareness, of responsibility, of acceptance. People make mistakes. We can always try to do better. This is really great. You're hitting the mark this afternoon. Rachel, if there was just one small piece of advice to end with this afternoon, what would it be?
Try and have empathy for your partner. Empathy always creates more safety. It helps us feel safer. Both giving empathy and receiving empathy. So take turns giving each other some empathy. Breathe, slow down, you know, and that'll help you manage your defences.
Rachel, it's always a pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Rachel Hannam is a psychologist from North Brisbane Psychologists.